They say some histories were never meant to be spoken aloud. Some truths are buried so deeply beneath the soil of time that even whispering them risks summoning shadows back into the world. But tonight, you've already crossed the threshold. You chose to press play, and that act alone means you are willing to walk further into the dark than most ever dare. Before we begin, I need something from you. Hit the like button, not for me, but to signal you're prepared to descend. Subscribe if you dare to keep unearthing what the world has tried to erase. And tell me, right now, in the comments, where are you watching this from? Because soon, the ground beneath your feet may not feel so stable. In a forgotten corner of America's past lies the story of the Dalton sisters. 3 young women who appeared ordinary, who walked among neighbors, went to church, and were seen laughing in the sunlight. Yet they carried with them a secret so disturbing that when whispered decades later, those who repeated it claimed their lives began to unravel. The sisters never aged. They never bent to time's cruelty. Photographs, yellowed with age, tell one story. Pale faces unchanged from 1847 to 1923, the same eyes staring out, unblinking, untouched by decades. Local records hint at birth dates, but curiously omit death dates. Clergy scribbled half-erased notes in parish ledgers about unnatural preservation. And in the town where they lived, old families warned their children never to wander too near the Dalton House, especially after dusk. History teaches us that the body is a cage of flesh destined to decay, yet here lies a puzzle that mocked nature's law. Was it witchcraft or something worse? The rumor spreads that the sisters had bound themselves to an ancient rite, older than Christianity, older than the colonies, something dug up from forbidden texts smuggled across the ocean. And if that is true, then what did they sacrifice to buy eternity? The Dalton family arrived in Massachusetts in the early 1800s, part of the wave of settlers seeking a new life. On the surface, they were respectable. Their father, Jonathan Dalton, was a merchant tied to transatlantic trade routes. Their mother, Margaret, was said to be devout, a woman whose hymn book never left her side. But when their 3 daughters, Eleanor, Jane, and Catherine, entered adolescence, people noticed strange habits that could not be explained away by religion or education. They did not age like other girls. Photographs taken 10 years apart show the same faces, smooth, unchanging. While their classmates grew into women, bent under life's burdens, the Dalton sisters remained suspended in time. In church, they never sang hymns, their lips pressed tight while others' voices rose. They left services early, always vanishing before communion was served. Neighbors whispered. Some claimed to hear chanting carried on the wind late at night. Voices not in English, but in a harsh, guttural tongue. Farmers swore that when the sisters walked past, livestock grew restless, milk soured, and chickens refused to lay eggs. Others recalled how the Dalton women were never seen in graveyards, never mourning at burials, even as death claimed friends and kin around them. Yet, curiously, no one confronted them openly. Fear wrapped itself around the town. Those who dared to speak too loudly of the sisters often suffered strange accidents, barn fires, sudden sickness, children disappearing into the woods. It was as though the very air around the Daltons punished anyone who sought to expose them. The sisters were always seen together, moving like a single entity, eyes scanning with unnatural calm. And always they were smiling, a smile that promised knowledge the world wasn't ready to face, a smile that suggested they had made a bargain with something that demanded more than prayers. But bargains always leave scars, and soon the town would begin to bleed. The first true fracture came in 1853. A young priest named Father Merrick arrived, fiery in faith and determined to cleanse the town of superstition. He noticed what others dared not: the Dalton sisters' refusal to partake in the sacraments, their unchanging faces, their disturbing presence. From his pulpit, he warned that evil lurked among them, cloaked in innocence. The sisters sat in the front pew as he preached against them, their eyes fixed on him with unblinking calm. Witnesses recalled how his voice faltered mid-sermon, how sweat drenched his cassock though the church was cold. That night, Father Merrick was found dead, his body rigid, mouth frozen open in a scream, though no one heard it. No marks of violence, no sign of poison, just a man whose spirit seemed ripped out from the inside. The town buried him quickly. No autopsy, no questions. Whispers grew louder. Had the Dalton sisters silenced him? After Merrick's death, the sisters became more emboldened. They appeared at gatherings more frequently, not aging, not bending to illness. Children claimed to see lights in their windows at midnight, shapes moving in patterns too precise to be chance. Farmers found strange symbols carved into trees near the Dalton property, circles intersecting with jagged lines, some filled with dried blood. And then people began to vanish. At first, a drifter or two, men without families whose absence drew little notice. But soon it was townsfolk. A mill worker disappeared walking home. A young mother vanished while fetching water from the well. Every time, the last to see them alive swore the Dalton sisters were nearby. The town was cracking under fear, but fear is a prison. No one dared accuse them aloud. Instead, they built walls of silence, pretending not to notice the immortality in their midst. But silence cannot hold forever. A surviving diary, hidden for decades in the attic of a burned-out farmhouse, gives us the closest thing to testimony. It belonged to Anna Whitcomb, a girl of 16 who had been a close friend of Eleanor Dalton in childhood. Her entries begin innocently enough, descriptions of games, sewing circles, walks by the river. But around 1855, the tone changes. Anna writes that Eleanor confessed something she should not have known, words that chilled her. Time is only flesh, and flesh is only a doorway. Anna describes being invited to the Dalton home, where the sisters showed her books bound in animal hide, filled with symbols she could not read. She writes of circles painted on the floor in ash, of chants that vibrated in her bones. Eleanor told her that youth could be locked, that decay could be paused, but only through exchange. One entry, dated October 12, 1855, shakes with ink blotches and shaky penmanship. They offered me the choice. To step out of time with them. To drink what they drink, speak the words they speak. They say the town is their harvest, that each season demands blood, but they are merciful. They choose only those the world will not miss. Anna's diary ends abruptly 2 weeks later. She was never seen again. That diary should have been enough to expose them, to send the sisters to the gallows. Yet when it was found decades later, no official records ever acknowledged its existence. Someone, or something, buried the truth alongside Anna's memory. Still, the words remain, an echo of a secret that refused to rot. The Dalton House itself became a monument of unease. A two-story structure of decaying timber, its windows always shuttered, its roof perpetually damp as though mist clung only to its frame. Inside, those few who claimed to enter spoke of halls that smelled of iron and salt, of mirrors covered in black cloth, of dolls arranged in circles on the floor. One traveler, a salesman who lodged with the Daltons briefly in 1862, described the night as dreamless, yet I woke with the taste of blood in my mouth and the feeling that my bones had been measured. He left before dawn and never returned to Massachusetts. Locals grew accustomed to avoiding the house. Paths bent around it. Children dared each other to touch the fence, and men spat on the ground when they passed. Yet, no one dared burn it, no one dared storm it. It was as if an invisible barrier of fear and superstition had been drawn, stronger than law, stronger than reason. And still, the Dalton sisters remained, unchanged. As civil war tore the nation apart, as neighbors aged and died, they were seen walking the same dirt roads, faces pale, eyes calm, always together, like the ticking of a clock that never advanced. But time has a way of collecting debts. The more they appeared unchanged, the more the legend of their bargain grew. Some said they had made a pact with Lilith, the first woman, the eternal rebel cast out of paradise. Others claimed they served something older, something that required the slow unraveling of human souls to feed its hunger. Whatever the truth, by the late 1800s, the Dalton sisters had become myth and terror in equal measure. Yet they were still there, always there, and one night, their presence would finally ignite into something the town could not ignore. The breaking point came on a cold November night in 1871. The Whitmore boy had vanished, 10 years old, last seen chasing his dog down the lane near the Dalton house. The dog returned the next morning, its fur slick with something dark, its eyes wide and trembling. The boy never came back. The town erupted. Grief turned to fury, and fury turned to courage. Torches were lit, voices raised. A mob of farmers, blacksmiths, and widows marched toward the Dalton house, swearing to end what decades of silence had allowed to fester. They broke the gate. They shattered the front door. And inside, what they found was enough to still their courage. The parlor was lined with bones. Not full skeletons, but fragments, jawbones, femurs, vertebrae, stacked neatly as though catalogued. Symbols burned into the walls glowed faintly, as if alive, shifting in the flicker of torchlight. In the center of the floor, a circle drawn in ash and blood, still damp. The Dalton sisters stood calmly in the middle, untouched by fear. Their dresses were immaculate, their hands folded. They did not plead, did not resist. Eleanor simply spoke. You cannot kill what is outside of time. The mob surged forward. Blows were struck, torches thrown. The house filled with smoke. Screams echoed. Not only human screams, but something deeper, something layered beneath like the tearing of fabric. When the smoke cleared, the Dalton house was engulfed in flames. The mob scattered, believing the sisters consumed. But when the ashes cooled, no bodies were found. Only 3 black stones arranged in a triangle where the sisters had stood. The town buried the memory, but whispers endured. And then sightings began again. In the years that followed the fire, the Dalton sisters were seen in places they should not have been. A funeral in 1875, 3 pale women standing at the back, untouched by age. A photograph taken at a county fair in 1882 shows 3 faces blurred in the background, faces unmistakably theirs. By 1890, letters circulated among ministers and judges, warning of unaging women who appeared wherever calamity followed. The stones left behind after the fire were passed into private hands, relics of the unspeakable. One landed with a judge, who reportedly kept it on his desk as a paperweight. Within a year, his wife fell into madness, clawing her own face until she bled. Another stone was taken by a merchant who boasted of owning a piece of witchcraft. His entire family perished in a house fire the following winter. The third stone disappeared into the collection of an academic in Boston, who, months later, resigned his post and disappeared into obscurity. Wherever the stones went, ruin followed. And yet the Dalton sisters walked free, untouched, always 3, always unchanged. By the turn of the century, stories multiplied, cattle drained of blood in Vermont, entire families missing in Connecticut, and in every whispered account, 3 women glimpsed at the edge of the woods, watching. The more they were denied, the stronger their legend grew. Some insisted they were demons in flesh. Others claimed they were immortals who had bound themselves to the earth with a contract older than Christianity. Scholars compare their story to the Moirai, the fates of ancient Greece, or to the Morrigan of Celtic lore, female triads tied to death and prophecy. Yet, unlike myth, the Dalton sisters did not fade with time. They walked, they lingered, they endured. The 20th century should have erased them. The world changed too quickly. Railroads, telegraphs, automobiles. Faces age faster in photographs now, time caught in sharper frames. And yet, still, the sisters appeared. A newspaper in 1907 reported the strange case of a barn collapse in upstate New York. Beneath the rubble, witnesses swore they saw 3 women standing unharmed, brushing dust from their dresses. The paper dismissed it as hysteria, but the local undertaker noted, in private, that the 3 women signed the burial ledger, not as mourners, but as witnesses. The names matched Eleanor, Jane, and Catherine Dalton. In 1913, A photographer in Pennsylvania captured a 4th of July parade. Behind a float of children waving flags stand 3 women, identical in face to photographs from 70 years prior. The photographer, unsettled, filed the plate away. His grandson discovered it decades later and swore the emulsion had decayed around every figure except theirs, which remained unnaturally sharp. By 1923, the sisters were seen less frequently, but the unease had grown heavier. A generation that had ignored the whispers was now forced to confront a possibility. What if immortality was not divine, but parasitic? What if eternal youth was stolen, not granted? For some, the Dalton sisters became obsession. Secret societies in Boston and New Haven wrote papers comparing their rituals to fragments of the corpus hermeticum, claiming they had tapped into the forbidden equation of life. For others, they became a cautionary tale, proof that there were doors better left unopened. And still their faces endured, always unchanged, always watching. It is here, in the shadows of the 1930s, that the Dalton sisters become more myth than fact. The Great Depression starved families, war drums echoed overseas, and yet scattered reports insisted the 3 women still walked. A traveler's diary from 1934 describes boarding a train from Boston to Chicago. In his carriage sat 3 women, pale and silent, their hands folded in unison. When he arrived in Chicago, they were gone, though no one recalled them disembarking. He wrote, "Their eyes were hollow, like wells too deep to see the bottom. I fear they were drinking something I could not name." Folklore shifted. In some towns, the Dalton sisters were said to lure children into the woods with promises of sweets, only for them to vanish forever. In others, they were described as omens of disaster, appearing days before fires, collapses, or sudden deaths. Their legend spread like smoke, filling the cracks of every fearful imagination. But behind the folklore lay something more disturbing. Records that showed unexplained disappearances spiking in towns where sightings of the sisters were reported. Coroners noted bodies drained of vitality, not blood, but something harder to define, as though time itself had been taken. By now, no one dared speak their name aloud in the towns of their origin. To do so, it was said, was to invite them into your home. The Dalton sisters had become a living curse, history embodied, never aging, never dying, never sated. By the mid-20th century, the Dalton sisters were less often seen in public, but their legend endured in silence. Secret files and local police departments spoke of unaging women tied to unsolved cases. A priest in Rhode Island wrote to the Vatican, describing encounters with 3 pale sisters who mocked the sacraments and walked through doors without opening them. His letter was marked as heresy and buried in archives. World War II came and went. Soldiers returned broken. The world's horrors multiplied, but in quiet American towns, whispers still clung. 3 women, dressed in fashions that never aged, still wandered the outskirts of gatherings. Always watching, always present. The post-war boom brought new eyes, journalists, skeptics, folklorists. Some dismissed the Dalton sisters as a rural legend exaggerated by grief and paranoia. Others collected stories, piecing together timelines that should have been impossible. In every photograph, every diary, every ledger, the same 3 names, the same 3 faces. And then came the most chilling revelation of all, the discovery of children's drawings. Found in attics and school archives across Massachusetts and New Hampshire, dated from 1849 to 1952, they depicted 3 tall women, pale and smiling, standing over small stick figures. Written beneath in childish scrawl, they never get old. They come at night. Decades blurred, but the Dalton sisters never did. Time was their servant. Fear was their language. And the deeper we look, the more it becomes clear, this was no simple haunting. This was the calculated harvesting of life itself. And if they endured into the 20th century, who's to say they aren't still walking tonight? The 1950s brought America a strange sense of security. Suburbs blossomed, televisions flickered, Families dreamed of prosperity. Yet beneath that sheen of normalcy, the Dalton sisters were still moving, still feeding. A declassified FBI memo, dated 1954, makes an obscure reference to 3 women of interest in connection with unexplained disappearances across 4 states. The memo describes them as appearing identical across multiple decades, noting that local law enforcement refused to pursue them further due to cultural superstition and fear of reprisal. The document was buried under thousands of case files, never followed up. In the same year, a family in rural Maine vanished overnight. Neighbors claimed to see 3 women walking from the property at dawn, their dresses clean despite the mud. When police investigated, they found the house intact, food still warm on the table, but no trace of the mother, father, or their 2 children. Only a circle of ash in the cellar, faintly humming when touched. The Cold War years should have drowned the memory of the sisters in atomic dread. But in every forgotten corner of New England, the whispers carried on. They were spotted at bus stops, at church picnics, always at the edge of gatherings, never aging, never speaking. Children who pointed at them were hushed. Adults who tried to follow them into the woods often didn't return. And still, no authority dared move against them. Some forces, it seemed, thrived in silence. The 1960s cracked America open: war protests, civil rights marches, the psychedelic revolution. Everything was changing, and in that chaos, the Dalton sisters found new shadows to inhabit. A college professor at Yale, dabbling in esoteric studies, wrote in his private journal about 3 women who approached me after a lecture, questioning me about ritual language. He described their beauty as unnerving, their presence as timeless. When he asked their names, they replied, "We are older than names, but you may call us Eleanor, Jane, and Catherine." Weeks later, that professor drowned in his own bathtub, though no water was in the tub when his body was found. Counterculture groups whispered about immortal priestesses who could unlock the doors of perception with blood and chanting. Some claimed the Dalton sisters joined underground communes, offering initiation rituals that ended in vanished members. Photographs from music festivals show 3 pale women standing at the edges of crowds, their clothing always too neat, their faces unchanged from images taken a century before. And here is the chilling part. During this decade, missing persons reports spiked, especially among drifters, runaways, and the forgotten. Victims no one would miss, just as Anna Whitcomb's diary had warned. The Dalton sisters were not relics of the past. They were evolving, adapting, feeding in the cracks of America's restless soul. The 1970s brought darker revelations. Technology was advancing, cameras sharper, records harder to erase. And still, the Dalton sisters appeared. A Boston journalist, investigating urban legends, pursued their trail across New England. He found parish ledgers stretching back to the 1840s, each marking the names Eleanor, Jane, and Catherine Dalton, always present, never crossed out. He tracked down elderly witnesses who swore the sisters had not aged a single day in their lifetimes. His final notes read, "They have preserved themselves not by blessing, but by bargain. They consume what cannot be replenished, the years of others." 2 weeks later, he vanished. His notes were found scattered in his apartment, pages soaked with salt water. The police closed the case, but among his papers was a chilling fragment. They walk still. They take in threes. Meanwhile, children continued to draw them. A set of sketches discovered in a Vermont elementary school storage room, dated 1974, depict 3 tall women holding hands around stick-figure children. Underneath, they said, "If I don't tell, I will never grow old." The message was clear. The Dalton sisters were not hiding. They were teaching. They were recruiting. By the 1980s, whispers of the Dalton sisters had moved into the realm of conspiracy. Paranoid radio hosts spoke of immortals in America draining vitality from the forgotten. Occult researchers compared their rituals to fragments of Babylonian incantations, preserving clay tablets that spoke of binding life through sacrifice. One chilling account came from a nurse in Massachusetts who worked the night shift at a rural hospital. She reported 3 women visiting a patient, an old man said to be dying of cancer. They stayed in his room for hours. When the nurse returned, the man was gone. His bed sheets were crisp, unwrinkled, as though no one had ever lain there. Hospital records erased his name the following day. The nurse resigned, refusing to speak further. Another witness, a highway patrol officer in 1986, swore he pulled over 3 women walking barefoot along the interstate. They carried nothing, yet their clothes were immaculate, their faces unmarked by time. He escorted them to the next town, but when he checked his rearview mirror, they were gone. This was the decade of surveillance, of records, of technology creeping into every corner. Yet still, the Dalton sisters slipped through without trace. It was as if reality itself bent to their passage. The 1990s should have ended them. Cameras everywhere, DNA testing, databases linking every disappearance. And yet, reports persisted. In 1994, a college student researching urban legends interviewed locals in a fading New England town. They told him, hushed, about 3 women who have always been here. He laughed, dismissing it as folklore. Days later, he emailed a friend a single line before disappearing forever. I saw them. They are real. Across the decade, sightings increased near places of transition, train stations, hospitals, bus depots. They always appeared calm, composed, as if waiting for someone. And soon after, people would vanish. Digital cameras began capturing strange anomalies. 3 figures blurred, faces too sharp, light bending strangely around them. Skeptics called it artifact. Believers called it proof. But the truth was heavier. The Dalton sisters had survived fire, priests, mobs, revolutions, wars, and technology itself. Nothing touched them. Nothing aged them. And each decade, they grew quieter, more elusive, more calculated. By the end of the century, a chilling realization settled in the minds of those who dared study them. The Dalton sisters were not just surviving. They were preparing, and the 21st century would be theirs. The 21st century was supposed to shine light into every shadow. With the internet, surveillance cameras, social media, how could anything remain hidden? Yet the Dalton sisters did not vanish in the flood of digital eyes. They adapted. Reports began surfacing in online forums, scattered like breadcrumbs. Threads about unaging women seen across New England towns. Grainy cell phone footage uploaded in 2003 showed 3 figures walking together at dusk, their faces blurred, but their silhouettes unmistakable. The video was dismissed as hoax, but those who watched closely swore something about it felt wrong, like time stuttered around them. By 2007, paranormal investigators circulated photos of the sisters appearing in reflections but not in person. One group exploring an abandoned farmhouse found 3 chairs arranged in a circle, each seat still warm. Their audio recorders captured faint whispers. You came too soon. Meanwhile, missing persons reports climbed. Not the high-profile vanishings that drew headlines, but quiet disappearances, truckers between routes, attics and alleys, drifters on the edges of towns. People the world already ignored, just as it had always been. The Dalton sisters thrived not by escaping attention, but by feeding on society's blind spots. In an age obsessed with visibility, they lingered where no one bothered to look. And soon, they began leaving marks again. Symbols scorched into trees, ash circles in basements, whispers of chants not heard since Anna Whitcomb's diary. It was a sign. They weren't only surviving, they were summoning. You've heard their story. You've followed their trail through centuries. And now, you face the same choice Anna Whitcomb faced in 1855. Do you turn away, or do you keep listening? The Dalton sisters believed knowledge itself was a bargain. To hear their story was to brush against the edges of their world. To repeat, it was to step further inside. So now, I ask you to make a decision, not for me, but for yourself. If you want to lock in your transformation, if you're willing to carry this truth, you must leave a mark that cannot be erased. In the comments, type the phrase, "Time is the doorway" twice. Write it once to open the door. Write it again to seal it. This is not a gimmick. This is ritual. This is how memory binds to action, how stories carve into reality. Those who comment, it will carry the knowledge forward. Those who do not will remain spectators, forever at the edge. Because once you know the Dalton sisters' secret, you cannot go back. Their faces have been burned into your mind. Their story has already entered your bloodstream. And like them, it will not age. Now listen closely, because what comes next is the part almost no one dares to speak aloud. There are those who believe the Dalton sisters are not three individuals at all, but one presence divided across three vessels. This theory suggests they are fragments of a single consciousness, spread like roots into multiple bodies, so that if one were struck down, the others would endure. A trinity not of faith, but of survival. Evidence for this lies in the testimonies of witnesses who described the sisters moving in perfect unison, their gestures mirrored, their speech alternating without pause. One would begin a sentence, another would finish it. Their laughter was said to overlap like an echo, as though it came from a single source. Researchers have compared this to ancient rituals of soul division, practices whispered about in Egyptian and Mesopotamian fragments. The idea that life could be splintered, multiplied, and anchored into multiple vessels, creating an echo of immortality. But immortality comes at a price. What was the price for the Dalton sisters? Some say they were once ordinary women who, under the influence of their father's forbidden trade, unearthed texts never meant for human hands. Others say they were chosen, vessels prepared by something older than mankind, carved to be keepers of a covenant stretching back before recorded time. Whatever the truth, one thing remains undeniable. The Dalton sisters did not just survive centuries. They manipulated them. They bent the arc of time itself around their will. And that bending always demanded sacrifice. Modern disappearances have been traced, loosely, to areas long tied to the Daltons. In 2012, hikers in New Hampshire discovered a clearing with 3 standing stones, each marked with an unfamiliar sigil. Around the stones lay belongings of dozens of missing persons, wallets, shoes, torn clothing, but no bodies. The air was described as unnaturally still, as though the wind itself refused to enter. A researcher who visited the site returned home shaken. His notes described the sound of 3 voices humming just beyond his hearing, though no one else reported it. Days later, he was found collapsed in his study, his face pale, his eyes wide, his body perfectly preserved in a state medical examiners could not explain. It was as if he had frozen, not in temperature, but in time. Even stranger are the digital anomalies. Videos uploaded to the internet claiming to show the sisters often glitch, distorting frames, erasing sound. Metadata of such files sometimes shows creation dates decades in the past. How can a clip recorded on a modern phone carry a timestamp of 1964, unless the subject filmed is not bound to our timeline? The deeper we look, the more it becomes clear. The Dalton sisters are not legends frozen in the past. They are agents of something still unfolding, something that does not abide by time, reason, or law. And every sighting, every whisper, every diary is not history. It is a warning. What then is their purpose? If the Dalton sisters have walked through centuries, feeding, harvesting, summoning, what end are they moving toward? Some believe they are merely parasites, clinging to existence at the expense of others. But others whisper of a prophecy, that when the cycle of 3 reaches its conclusion, the sisters will no longer need to consume quietly. That they are building toward an unveiling, a moment when their bargain will be complete. Fragments of this prophecy appear in suppressed church records, scrawled in the margins of dusty Bibles, where priests dared not speak aloud. It speaks of 3 women who will remain as stone until the world forgets death, who will then open the mouth of the earth and let what is beneath rise again. What does it mean? Some interpret it as a metaphor, a warning against hubris and obsession with immortality. Others believe it is literal, that the sisters are gatekeepers, preserving something buried, something older than human civilization, something that demands release. The more you look, the more you realize the Dalton sisters are not anomalies. They are part of a structure, a plan, an order hidden beneath the skin of history. And if that order completes itself in our lifetime, the world we know may not endure. The early 2000s brought with them a wave of new witnesses, bloggers, amateur ghost hunters, thrill seekers armed with cameras. And in their recordings, in their shaky testimonies, the Dalton sisters began to re-emerge with startling clarity. One blogger from Massachusetts claimed he followed 3 women through a cemetery at night, convinced they were costumed performers. He filmed them for nearly 10 minutes, his lens catching only faint silhouettes. But when he reviewed the footage, every frame showed 3 women staring directly into the camera, though he swore they never turned their heads once. He uploaded the video in 2005. Within hours, the file corrupted. A week later, the blogger vanished. His website went dark, his domain erased as though it had never existed. Other reports tell of the sisters appearing in hospitals. Nurses describe patients who seemed to be recovering suddenly expiring after 3 women visited late at night. Security footage would glitch or rewind, looping moments over and over until the sisters' figures blurred beyond recognition. This is the paradox of the Dalton sisters in the modern age. The more the world advanced, the more undeniable their presence became. Yet every attempt to pin them down, to expose them, unraveled into silence. It was as if they fed not only on people, but on memory itself. By 2010, underground forums dedicated to dark history began sharing what they called Dalton sightings. The pattern was always the same. 3 women, pale, unchanging, appearing at sites of tragedy days before disaster struck. A fire in a Rhode Island nightclub killed nearly 100 people. Weeks later, witnesses came forward, claiming they had seen 3 women near the exit door just before the blaze began. Their descriptions matched those given a century earlier. In 2011, when an entire bridge collapsed in the Northeast, killing dozens, photographs surfaced showing 3 blurred figures on the shoreline that morning. They did not aid. They did not flee. They simply watched. To the untrained eye, these were coincidences, tricks of light, products of fear. But to those who knew the Dalton sisters' history, the pattern was clear. They were not random actors in tragedy. They were heralds of it. Like vultures circling above, they arrived before the strike, waiting to claim what followed, and perhaps guiding it. As technology advanced, so did the whispers. AI facial recognition software, used quietly by researchers, stumbled upon a strange anomaly. When tested against historical photographs, Civil War soldiers, Victorian portraits, Depression-era snapshots, 3 faces reappeared again and again. Always female, always pale, always the same bone structure. The program flagged them as matches to modern photographs of women spotted in New England. Yet this was impossible. These are faces supposedly separated by over 100 years. The research was buried, discredited by its own creators as data error. But some who worked on it began to speak anonymously online. They said the program had identified Eleanor, Jane, and Catherine Dalton across at least 18 decades. The odds of this being coincidence were mathematically impossible. But the deeper implication was more chilling. The Dalton sisters weren't hiding from technology. They were etched into its fabric. The more we searched for them, the more clearly they appeared. It was as if technology itself could not help but reveal them. And maybe that was their plan. In 2015, a chilling discovery was made in an abandoned church in Massachusetts. Beneath rotting floorboards, investigators uncovered a sealed chest filled with journals dating back to the late 1800s. The writings belonged to clergy who had tracked the Dalton sisters for decades. One entry, written in 1889, reads, "They are not witches as the townsfolk believe. They are keepers of an older covenant. They speak a language I cannot trace to any scripture or tribe. When they chant, the earth itself shudders." Another entry from 1921, "I tried to confront them. I carried holy water and the crucifix. They smiled at me as though I were a child. My strength drained from my bones, my voice failed. I fled, but I left something of myself behind. I feel hollow. I am becoming a husk. Most chilling of all was the final entry, dated 1947. I saw what they protect. In the cellar of their home, beneath symbols carved in the stone, there is a hollow space that breathes. Something waits there, something older than sin. And when it rises, the sisters will no longer need to hide. The journals vanished shortly after their discovery, taken by unnamed officials. But the fragments that leaked online were enough to confirm what many already feared. The Dalton sisters were not the final horror. They were the guardians of it. By 2020, sightings of the Dalton sisters had spread beyond New England. Reports placed them in Chicago, San Francisco, even overseas. Always three, always unchanged. In New Orleans, three pale women were photographed during Mardi Gras, their expressions detached, their clothing too old-fashioned. Weeks later, a fire consumed an entire historic block. In London, tourists captured images of three women standing outside an abandoned cathedral. Locals later reported hearing chanting in the dead of night, echoing from the empty building. Their reach was no longer confined. Whatever covenant bound them seemed to expand, stretching like cracks across the world. And here lies the most terrifying thought. If the Dalton sisters have walked this earth for nearly 2 centuries, if they have never faltered, never been stopped, then perhaps their purpose is not survival at all. Perhaps it is preparation. Preparation for something vast, something patient, something that demands centuries of silence before revealing itself. And maybe, just maybe, that unveiling is closer than we think. 2021 brought with it an age of collective uncertainty, pandemics, unrest, and the constant hum of fear. And in that chaos, the Dalton sisters thrived. Reports multiplied, blurred photographs circulated, whispered testimonies emerged. But unlike before, their presence carried a new edge. They were no longer only watchers. They began to interact. In Boston, a woman claimed she was approached by 3 figures while walking home at dusk. They did not speak, but she felt her mind flood with voices. Her own memories reshuffled, replaced, erased. She stumbled home hours later with no recollection of her childhood. Her husband swore she had been gone for only minutes. In California, a man posted online that he met 3 sisters who touched his hand and whispered in unison, "You are already ours." Days later, his account was deleted, his home emptied, his existence scrubbed. The Dalton sisters had moved from passive haunting to active claiming. They weren't waiting for us to collapse anymore. They were helping along. As these encounters spread, so did a terrifying new theory that the sisters did not merely exist in our world, but had learned to rewrite it. A professor of comparative mythology traced references to 3 eternal maidens across countless cultures: Norns in Norse legend, the Moirai in Greece, the Morrigan in Ireland. Always 3, always guardians of fate. But in these myths, the maidens did not merely observe life. They cut, they rewove, they severed. The professor published a paper suggesting the Dalton sisters might not be human at all, but manifestations of that timeless triad, beings who step into history when the world teeters, guiding the collapse toward their own design. He was laughed out of academia. His career ended. 2 months later, his apartment burned to the ground. Witnesses swore they saw 3 women leaving the building just before the fire. The line between myth and history blurred. What had once been folklore now breathed. The Dalton sisters had become the living embodiment of something we were never meant to meet. If their covenant is real, then its foundation is older than America itself. The journals from 1889 spoke of a hollow space beneath their home. Other accounts describe a rhythmic sound under the earth, like a heartbeat. In 2022, seismic reports from Massachusetts detected unexplained tremors localized to one forgotten township. No fault lines, no earthquakes, just a pulsing that grew stronger every month. Researchers dismissed it as machinery, fracking, an error in instruments. But locals whispered that the earth was breathing, that beneath it something stirred, and the Dalton sisters were keeping vigil, ensuring the awakening remained unseen until the right moment. If this is true, then every death, every tragedy they attended, every soul they claimed was not for themselves. It was sustenance for what lies beneath, a slow feeding, a centuries-long preparation for a birth that may not be of flesh at all, but of something far older, darker, hungrier. The question we must ask is not who the Dalton sisters are, but what they serve. Their eternal youth is not a gift freely granted. It is the mark of a pact, one that requires silence, sacrifice, and endless collection of souls. And if they are guardians, then the true horror is not their immortality, but the one they guard. Some believe this force is not demonic, but cosmic. A fracture in reality, a predator older than history itself, locked away in the soil of America. The sisters, with their chants and their rituals, are the jailers keeping it at bay, or perhaps keeping us blind until it decides to rise. And maybe that is why governments never intervene. Maybe that is why every shred of evidence disappears. Because the Dalton sisters aren't fugitives. They are collaborators, agents of something too vast for us to comprehend, too dangerous for us to resist. And if that is true, then our silence is not safety. It is complicity, which brings us here to the present. The Dalton sisters remain. They're still cited, still whispered about, still feared. And if the tremors in Massachusetts mean what they seem to, then their work is nearly finished. You must ask yourself, why have you heard their story now? Why do their faces appear in your thoughts when you close your eyes? Why does it feel, even now, as though three figures are watching you from just beyond the edge of your vision? Because the Dalton sisters are not confined to history books or cursed towns. They move through memory, through story, through the act of listening itself. By hearing their tale, you have stepped closer to them. By knowing their names, you have given them room to know yours. And as their covenant nears completion, as the earth beneath their homes stirs and hungers, perhaps what they need most is not your fear. Perhaps what they need is your recognition. It is no longer a question of belief. Across continents, across centuries, the Dalton sisters remain unchanged. Their names echo like a curse: Eleanor, Jane, Catherine. But perhaps those names are only masks, worn to move through time unnoticed. Some say they are the last remnants of an ancient cult that once spanned empires. Others whisper they are fragments of something divine, fallen emissaries who traded eternity for servitude. And yet others insist they are nothing more than women who stumbled onto a ritual too powerful to reverse, and now carry the burden of guarding a prison none of us can see. But ask yourself this: if their purpose was protection, why do they appear at tragedy's edge? Why do they harvest the souls of the innocent? Why do disasters follow in their shadow like obedient hounds? Perhaps the truth is darker. Perhaps the Dalton sisters do not guard against what lies beneath. Perhaps they feed it. And if so, then every death, every whisper, every fleeting glance of pale figures in the corner of your vision is a contribution. To what? To whom? That answer has been waiting, patient for centuries. The ground in Massachusetts has not gone still. Reports from late 2023 describe low-frequency sounds that instruments cannot identify. A resonance beneath the earth, neither mechanical nor natural. Witnesses describe hearing it even when standing miles away, an underground pulse that vibrates in the chest like a second heartbeat. A handful of explorers claim they followed the sound to the ruins of the Dalton homestead. They found symbols scorched into the earth, circles overlapping, lines that bent like veins. The center was hollow, as if the ground had collapsed from beneath. They swore they heard chanting, though they were alone. The explorers never returned. Their accounts survived only through fragments uploaded before their disappearance. But the last line in their journal chills the blood. The sisters were not hiding from us. They were waiting for us to arrive. If that is true, then the Dalton sisters' covenant is complete. The centuries of silence, the endless harvesting of lives, the meticulous erasure of evidence, all of it was preparation, not for their survival, but for an emergence. And if you're listening now, if you feel the pressure in your chest as these words settle inside you, then you're already part of it. The Dalton sisters still walk. They are still in a ged, still pale, still watching. They do not need your faith, nor your worship. All they require is your awareness. Because awareness is the first tether, a thread pulled taut across time, binding you to them. You have walked through their history, seen their shadows at the edge of disaster, felt their silence press against your ears. And now, in knowing them, you are marked, not cursed, not blessed, simply seen. If you feel the need to resist, you cannot. If you feel the urge to forget, you will fail. For the Dalton sisters dwell not in history alone, but in memory. And memory, once lit, never goes dark. So when you step away from the screen, when you glance into mirrors or pass through doorways, when you feel the weight of 3 unseen eyes, know this: you were never supposed to hear their story. And yet you did. And that knowledge is forbidden. Like, subscribe, share, if only to pass this burden to another. Leave your comments, but frame them carefully. Each word is a thread. Each share is a knot. And perhaps, by passing their names into the world, you delay the moment they claim you fully. This story ends here. But the Dalton sisters do not. They never will.